And so saving them hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on a relatively inexpensive solution to get them a ton of value very quickly. And we're talking months, not years.
Welcome to UpTech Report. This is our Applied Tech series. UpTech Report is sponsored by Terraleap. Learn how to leverage the power of video at terraleap.io. Today, I'm excited to be joined by my guest, Charlie Key, who's based in Cincinnati, Ohio. He's the CEO and co-founder of Losant. Welcome, Charlie. Good to have you on.
Thanks for having me.
Now, Losant started in 2015, and it is a development platform for IoT products and services. So basically, people can build on it or off of it beyond there. So help me understand, man, like, what was the problem you saw and set out to solve when it comes to, I guess, IoT development?
Yeah, that's a great question. I started this company with two other co-founders, Brandon and Michael. And Brandon and Michael and myself, we've known each other now for close to 20 years. We met at college at Rose-Hulman in Indiana, where we got different engineering degrees and have done a couple companies along the way. And so right before Losant, Brandon and myself had a software company called Modulus, which we ended up selling to Progress Software, public software company based out in Bedford, Massachusetts, so right outside of the Boston area. And while we were there, we started to see a lot of companies start to think about IoT. And at the time, IoT was very much starting to get to be like a very hypey kind of word, and a lot of people were starting to dip their toes into what that actually meant. In the industrial space, you had this whole machine to machine, M to M kind of thing that was IoT before it was IoT. But we started to see some of our customers while we were in progress start to think about this, and mainly it was they wanted to track. I remember one very specifically. They wanted to track all of the snow plows in their city to keep track of which streets had been plowed in real time and be able to provide that data back to the city and then back to the citizens. And so you could see exactly what had been plowed and what hadn't been plowed. That was a very, very early one. And I remember seeing that, and we started to see a couple other ones pop up, and we have always spent our time in the development world. And so we got very interested in it. And how are these people building these products and services? And we started to dive in a little bit. And after diving in a little bit and spending some time in this space, Brandon and myself decided that it was time for us to jump out of Progress and try a new adventure. And that's what became Losant, and we spent really the first couple months just trying to understand what the market was doing, what tools were people using, what challenges were they having. We had an idea of the problem that we wanted to try to solve, but we wanted to find out from people that were in the market trying to build this stuff today. And so we talked to everybody from the P&Gs of the world to the small industrial companies. And so that kind of led us down the path of what we wanted to do and how we wanted to solve it.
You sell your first venture, but you still see this opportunity. Like, all right, we got to jump into this. We got to solve this ourselves now. And now, if I remember from our previous chat, your history of your family is actually in manufacturing. So the future of IoT and industrial, you actually were seeing that already from there. And so like start that passion.
Oh man, it was crazy. You think about all of these conversations about, industrial 4.0 or the new industrial revolution or whatever people were calling it at the time, industrial IoT. I grew up on a shop floor. My family has grown up here in Cincinnati, helping manufacture parts for jet engines. And so, really saw a lot of this kind of firsthand. And my father, who was a big influence in, where I've gone from a technology standpoint, and even how I think about industrial IoT and some of these things. I remember we were having a conversation, I think it was Thanksgiving time, and he was saying that, they have all these machines all over the place. Hundreds of machines that are manufacturing stuff, and they know if they've broken down, obviously, or something's wrong. But they don't know a lot of this before it happens. They don't know a lot of this at a 30,000 foot view across all of their equipment. They don't know across all of their plants all at the same time. And starting to peel back some of those layers, now we talk about digital transformation and all of this is fairly obvious, but even 5 years ago, it's still early, and it's still early today in the industrial sector. And so a lot of these things really started to open, my eyes and the kind of create this thesis around what Losant was going to be and the problems we were trying to solve and why we thought it was a big problem to solve, right?
You mentioned this the hype around 4.0 industrialization and it's coming with IoT. What's the gap that's been existed there that has prevented this wonderful growth of innovation? What's this gap?
Well, I don't know how much time we have here, but we can dive into the top ones, I think. Some of it is organizational, some of it is operational, and some of it's technology, right? From an organizational standpoint, we have many of these companies, especially we'll call mid-tier manufacturing. And so when I think about that, I think of, a manufacturing company, maybe it produces a couple $100 million, in revenue. And so that's a large operation. But in the manufacturing space, it's kind of middle of the road. And we've got a lot of those in the Midwest. We've got a lot of them here in Cincinnati. But these companies are run operationally to churn out the products that they're manufacturing. A lot of the times it's a couple of different SKUs of products and they churn them out as fast as they can, with a lot of the emphasis on making sure the equipment is up and running that moment and not a lot of forethought into how are we strategically going to innovate ourselves, our business over the next 3 years, 5 years. It's a very reactionary world in that space. And so that organizational structure is hard to break, right? Like a lot of the times you can take a company, $200-300 million, manufacturing company. They might have 3 IT people, 4 IT people. Yeah. They don't have software people sitting around. Maybe they've got a database, engineer who's overseeing Oracle, working with their SAP, but they don't have a ton of people sitting around to try to solve some of these highly technical, but different technical than what they're used to doing day in and out. So that organizational challenge has been a big part of it.
You see this like last year with the pandemic, that mentality and that shift of focus for technology is coming?
I think so. We've already seen it in certain parts of all industries, right? The pandemic brought out this idea of, and we talk about digital transformation. And again, one of these giant buzzwords that who knows exactly what it means. In my world, when I think about it a lot, it's how to replace a clipboard, with a digital form. How do we replace everything that we're trying to manually do with something that is a digital representation? And this doesn't always mean that we're replacing people, right? Like people talk a lot about how automation is going to replace people. AI is going to remove a bunch of jobs. But right now we have a lot of inefficiencies in these processes that would allow and enable our current people to do more and be more efficient and produce more, creating more margin. And so that is what I'm seeing right now. We're seeing all of those process inefficiencies across a lot of the different parts of the business become very relevant and day in and day out, not to mention that a lot of people just can't physically get into spaces. So remote monitoring is becoming more important, but all of this is this shift that we're starting to see.
Yeah. Are you seeing when it comes to like this definition of IoT? So, I mean, that's part of what you're slogan, like the Internet of Things. Is that just part of this digitization, that yes, goes to it? Or help me understand further, like specifically you guys, like what is the space that you're playing and trying to enable then for industrialization?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great question is, where is Losant, where are we spending our time and efforts in this industrial revolution, we'll say. And really for us, it comes around understanding what's happening with our equipment out in the field, what's happening with our equipment day in and day out from a remote standpoint. And this enables so many more value-added opportunities for these organizations. If we're producing 10,000 compressors a year, and we don't know what's happening with those 10,000 compressors out in the field without putting a person there or having a person standing in front of a SCADA system, that becomes a huge drain on our product, our productivity and our efficiency, not to mention our support capabilities and our adjusted service to our customers.
there's like more visibility on the assets that you have and what they're doing or not doing.
Yeah, that's step one, right? Like if you think about it, it's a journey for each one of these companies. So step one is let's start pushing that data from those pieces of equipment into a semi-centralized system, right? Like let's start grabbing all of that information, pushing it up, visualizing it, starting to report on it, understanding it. This is before we even get into, the world of AI and machine learning and all of these other things. If we can start just producing data around what's happening with our stuff and giving ourselves visibility to that data anywhere we want it, we have a lot of value right there, right? Like that's step one.
Can you just to be able to kind of give a real world example, any clients that you are working with right now or have worked?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I remember one of our very first customers is this company in Australia, the National Pump and Energy. They have large pumps at gold mine sites throughout Australia, like literally in the middle of nowhere in the outback. They have these large pumps. They're used to pump out these gold mine wells, and they have to continuously run for 6 months plus at a time. So these pumps will be, and are extremely important to the process. So before they started remote monitoring and understanding and adding, some other things we'll talk about, they were literally on a scheduled maintenance. People were flying on planes out to these remote sites, checking on the equipment, making sure that it was working, doing the scheduled maintenance and the preventative maintenance. And that was how they just did things. They literally had to fly people all over the place all year long. Forward, they now have connected these machines. Now, they didn't have to add a ton of, let's say, additional hardware. So, all of these compressors and pumps, they all have controllers on them. Those controllers usually have access to that data, through one method or another. So step one is let's connect to that controller and start sending that data back. In their case, that goes back all the way through cellular back to the platform and starts bringing to light all of this interesting information that they have. That's what step one. Now they know if something's breaking, right? Like they now can base everything on the current condition of the asset. So now they're doing, instead of preventative maintenance, they're down doing condition-based maintenance. Now, what they were able to learn about this data is as they continued to analyze it, as they continued to look at it, they started noticing that there were a couple instances where as these variables, certain variables started to come back and looked, they could tell that it was a trend that a certain part of the pump was going to break, had not broken yet. So now they can create some relatively simple algorithms that will tell them predictively that they're going to have a part break on this pump in a period of time that they can now preemptively go repair and fix that issue. And so this is a journey that all of these companies are working through to get there. And so saving them hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on a relatively inexpensive solution to get them a ton of value very quickly. And we're talking months, not years.
Now, as a platform, an IoT platform, help me understand like the tech stack itself. Like, how does it work? Are effectively the different companies that come into you, they're just building on top of it? Their own software folks are doing it. Like, help me walk me through that. Yeah,
absolutely. So if we think about what I call as like a typical IoT solution, so you think of it as stack, right? We'll call it their asset or their piece of equipment. That's the hardware creating the data. We have sitting above that, maybe some additional sensors or a gateway, and that gateway is connected to that piece of equipment and pulling the data from it, right? So that's kind of hardware. Sitting on that gateway, we actually have software that can sit on that gateway and help collect that data, help do some edge analysis, collection, check for things, right?
Connect with almost any hardware out there?
Connect with a large variety of hardware out there. And so now you can do some edge thing, and you can think about this as a way to, reduce all of that bandwidth of data that we might have to send up. So we can start checking some of that at the edge, do a little bit of analysis, make sure everything's running, and then send up, let's say, every 5 minutes, every 10 minutes, every 15 minutes, instead of sending up every second all of this data. So you have that. So that's sitting there. So we have software that sits there. And then you have connectivity. So cellular, Wi-Fi, landline, whatever is appropriate, LoRa and all of these other technologies are coming out as different connectivity options. So that sits there. And then the data will flow up into the cloud. And the cloud is, in our case, we run on top of Google's cloud for most of our customers. Now our customers can choose kind of where and how they want to run that, but we'll just say Google for the moment. The data flows into our platform inside of Google. And so we'll collect that data at that point. We'll store that data for our customer. We'll start to process it. And so you're going to have two different things that kind of happen in parallel at this point. One is we're going to present it, give it up in nice dashboards. And those dashboards are where their folks will come in and configure them and choose what those dashboards look like. They'll choose what data they want to see, how they want it broken down. So do I want to see the average of temperature over the last 12 hours and show it next to, my vibration data, whatever that looks like. Those are all configurable. So that's where that user is going to go in and do that. And that's a very easy kind of drag and drop interface. And in parallel, where we've spent a ton of our time is allowing our customers to process that data in what we call our workflow engine. And our workflow engine, if you think about it, is a low-code drag and drop interface for designing the logic and processing that happens on this data. So this is, again, where that customer and their technical folks are going to come in and design that process and that workflow. So it's triggered when a data point comes in. Maybe they want to do a little bit of running average against that data. Or maybe they want to check that data, and then if it's bad, they want to pull a record from Salesforce, grab the customer record, figure out who they need to contact inside of the workflow, and then send an email and a text message to the appropriate sales or service rep. And so that workflow is all designed by the customer, built inside of our platform, delivering that process of what should happen to that data. And then both of these kind of culminate in what we call an experience. And you can think about that experience as a web application for the most part, and an API where that interface where the customer, our customer, the equipment manufacturer, their customers will have access to that data, hopefully, and have access to the reports. And that experience is how our customer, the equipment manufacturer, will deliver that to their folks. So they get a fully branded experience to deliver to their customers on all of this data and add a ton of value, or even a new revenue generating product. And so, that's kind of the stack that we play in.
Your as you mentioned, that your customer is the hardware person that's trying to build out a solution for the end customer. Is that
a lot of times? So if you think about it again, and in like National Pump and Energy. So National Pump and Energy has these pumps. Their customers are the people running and buying these pumps from them and running these pumps all over the place. And so they're delivering a solution to those customers, right? We think about it as like B2B to B, right? We're going to the business is going to another business, and our platform enables all of these complex scenarios and hierarchies of that, both the customer, but also the data access and data security. And so that's really where we play and treat it very well. Another one of our customers is Verizon, and they use it very similarly, but they provide those new products and services. So one of their products is a shipment asset tracking solution. They have their own hardware that they've built with a hardware partner. It's a GPS tracking multi-sensor device this big, and you can buy that from them. And when you get it, you're going to go to, criticalassettracker.verizon.com. I don't actually know if that's the URL or not, but once you go there, you're basically logging into, a website where you can see where your tracker is and see the condition of those sensors on the tracker. And that's all built inside of our platform. So that entire application and that entire experience is all built in our platform. So the software that we deliver enables all of those components, and their team can go in and change that or customize it or configure it differently. And so that they can deliver it to their customers in a very unique way, in a very branded way for Verizon or whoever the customer is.
Being that white labeled solution, and the end business or user may not know it actually exists, but you're empowering that whole solution. I'm fascinated with, there's this growing trend of whether they're APIs or platforms or basically a layer in between of software and another software to make it happen. And I think it's fascinating. We're in a space now and a time where we can make applications faster and easier because we have solutions that you don't have to be when you're say, I want to build a solution. You don't have to be an expert at all the different slices, if I ever say.
Yeah, no, you're 100% correct. I think you just pitched our product. So you've nailed it. I mean, our whole goal in life is to make it as easy as possible and as fast as possible for our customers to get those solutions built, get them delivered out in the market, lower that long-term cost of ownership for them, lower the amount of expertise they have to carry in-house. And you just mentioned that, and that's important, right? All of it, we're not asking every company to be an IoT expert. What we're asking them is to choose the right IoT experts to partner with. And that's the big shift in a lot of this is just like you mentioned, they don't have to know all of these different components to get a solution in the market.
Now, you mentioned earlier the edge computing, and I think it's a fascinating kind of future where a lot more can be happening at the edge. Can you speak more to that concept and what you see as the future to mobile computing?
Yeah, we see it all over the place. First of all, I mean, you see, especially, and we talked a little bit about the industrial sector, and that space is going to continue to accelerate their needs in the mobile edge computing space.
Can you define it? Let's actually start there. Can you define mobile edge computing?
So the way we talk about it internally is there's multiple layers to like that edge computing. So if we think about, the machine itself, now technically that's right at the very leaf, right? Like very, very, very edge. That absolutely is going to have some of its own processing. It's going to do some of its own pieces. One step away from that is going to be that local environment, maybe a small gateway baby computer that's doing some processing. And so, this is really where people start to think about that edge, right? Like, that is that very edge piece that maybe is collecting data from 5 or 10 different machines from there and here and bringing them together and doing some interesting stuff with them. And then there's this very big trend of what's happening in the telco space and the software-defined network and the software-defined storage is this mobile edge computing, which I think about it as like one layer above this, right? Like, you think about it for a whole facility, we have now a full set of capabilities for computing, which, we would have called like VMs, 5-10 years ago. We'd have called VMware and it had a rack of stuff. Now we have mobile edge computing and it's a rack of stuff, but it's a rack of different stuff. But it brings a whole another layer of computing capabilities because we're taking a lot of these services people have come to expect at the cloud level and starting to bring them down. So the first part of that is important is, we've come to expect a very great level of service from cloud providers and cloud service providers, and a lot of compute capabilities there, whether it's storage or image recognition or video processing or storage breakdown, or all of these different things. We're bringing those down a layer to a facility, to a campus, and that's that mobile edge compute layer that is becoming very important. And you're going to combine that with private networks that are layered in with that to enable a whole nother set of solutions. So you can think about, stadiums. Want to have some good friends who are doing some excellent stuff and video for sports. But all of that video is coming from the athletes, wearing cameras or whatever else, and running back to a mobile edge computing system inside of the facility to process all that, because it's a massive amount of bandwidth. It's a massive amount of compute needed. And so that encompasses a lot of this need. We're going to see it also because of data security and data privacy concerns. So if you're, a large amusement park, maybe you don't want all of this data going to the cloud about where people are and what they're doing inside of your parks at all times in every moment. And so maybe you push all that to the mobile edge where you can process that, pull the data out that you need to, provide the insights back up to the cloud that you need to, and the processes to come back into the park that you need to. And so those are all of the pieces that are driving this forward.
What do you see if you're kind of looking at the future here of both edge, but I just IoT in general when it comes to the use. I guess you're mostly focused on the industrialization and manufacturing space. But what do you see as the future of like what's coming up? What are you guys working on, and what do you see overall the industry?
Yeah. So, this edge piece is very important. And I think it's both moving down layers to make it easier to program the microcontrollers, the real-time operating systems, the low cost, because what we got to do, if I think about the things that we need to do to make IoT successful across all of the industries, is we've got to lower cost of hardware, got to lower cost of connectivity, got to lower the cost of compute, storage. So if we can make it easier to program the real-time operating system chips, what's sitting in your cell phone, what's sitting in your watch, all of those things, if we can lower that cost, that lowers the cost of rollout. If we can lower the cost of connectivity, we're going to see all these things come down. It's part of one, a lot of these are becoming commoditized, from a connectivity standpoint, from a process compute standpoint, but also new innovations in technology are making it easier to do these things. So that's step one. We're going to continue to see that. And IoT is going to continue to see a ramp up off of that. The second part is we're going to see a lot more standardization on value added use cases, right? I think we already know a lot of what they are, but people are still trying to figure those out, right? Asset tracking, indoor asset tracking, building and managing our buildings better, right? One of the big things that is coming out of this pandemic is we've got so much space that is not being utilized correctly today because one, we haven't been allowed to have people in there, but two, those buildings are running their HVACs a lot more than they need to. They're running their lights a lot more than they need to. The amount of energy waste that we've had over the last year and will continue to have is massive. And so IoT is going to be a big part of understanding and automating these systems, better processes. So those are two big areas. I think telcos with 5G are going to really start to figure out over the next 2 years where those IoT solutions are that are very important for them and their customers. And so we're going to see that shift. They've invested massive multi-billions of dollars in the infrastructure for 5G, and both not only from the public standpoint in the cell phones, but also in how do we bring it to our enterprises. And so you're going to see a lot of drive there. And so those are big components. And then we haven't even really talked about the machine learning and the AI stuff that is all going to change the world and turn the robots on, and our trucks are going to take over the world.
First they'll drive by themselves, then they'll take over. Now, just for fun, Charlie, let me know what if you could wave a magic wand and have a futuristic sci-fi solution come into existence. What would that be? If you just had to pick something pretty open-ended, what would you have?
I'm going to say one that I've talked to multiple people about just because we think it really interesting. If you think about running a factory floor and the amount of daily manual processes, we've got this view, and I've talked to my father again about this, is like he wants to be able to put on like an augmented reality headset and manage and run an entire shop floor and all of the machines from a single view. It's like it's the more friendlier version of Ender's Game, basically. We're running a bunch of machines that are helping build and change the industrial landscape. And I think that maybe not that so much, but I think a lot of these things are going to enable us in the U.S. to put back a lot of the manufacturing work that we really want to have as a society and as our economy. I think it's important for a lot of these technologies to bring this to light and here in the States.
So you could see easily a world where a worker is putting on AR glasses or a headset and they're controlling the machinery and et cetera that's around them, just using their hands and through the augmented interfaces.
I think we're a ways out, but I think we're not as far as people think we are from the, at least technologically, being able to do some of these very interesting things.
Yeah, I actually just did another interview recently with a company called Mira, and they are in manufacturing AR remote in, and then you can interact with the worker, what they're seeing. So for training and interaction, it's getting there, but not quite controlling
Right.
I don't think I've interviewed anybody on controlling and using the equipment.
And I think well, I know one of the challenges is security and privacy in that situation, right? Like if you're telling me I can have a single headset / controls to control every machine in a Ford factory, for instance, I mean, just even if it was technically possible today, try to convince the CIO of a large company
Same ideas.
To say that was okay, right? So we'll get there.
Yeah, but I love the future that you paint, and a lot of it is based off of just continuing to connect all the technology pieces that we have, our hardware to the software, to be able to control and know what's going on in our different places. Thank you so much, Charlie, for the insights and what you've been sharing. For those that want to learn more, they can go over to Losant.com. That's Losant.
Yeah.
Losant.com. And something you can sign up for free trials. Is that a good first step for folks?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd say there's two great first steps. Sign up for a free trial, which is our sandbox. It's always free. You can jump in. You can do anything you want in the platform. And then the second one is we have an online training course called Losant University, losant.com/university. And it will walk you through and teach you all about the platform and how to build IoT solutions. And so I think that's a great other starting spot for folks to try and learn and get going in this world.
What's the typical person that it would make sense to go through that university? Because it sounds like what's the skill level or knowledge level?
What we say and what we tell our customers is that anyone that has a small technical knowledge, so understanding of basically if this then that type knowledge, can start and start learning. If you are a web developer, you're going to be highly successful in the platform. I mean, that it's a pretty low bar to be pretty successful. We've had everyone from marketing folks build pretty interesting stuff.
Very cool. Well, thank you again, Charlie, for being on the series.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. All right. We'll see you guys on the next episode of UpTech Report.
Have you seen a company using AI, machine learning, or other technology to transform the way we live, work, and do business? Go to uptechreport.com and let us know.